My husband begged me to adopt his distant cousin's baby to save her from foster care. 6 months later, a DNA test proved the baby wasn't adopted at all. She was his biological child, conceived during an affair, hidden from me through an elaborate lie. I never imagined the worst betrayal of my marriage would arrive disguised as a baby. It was a Thursday evening. Ordinary, forgettable. I was halfway through reheating leftovers when my husband walked through the door, eyes red, voice already shaking. He didn't even take off his shoes, just stood there like the weight of something enormous was pressing down on his chest. "We need to talk," he said. Those 4 words used to scare me. Back then, I thought they meant finances, stress, maybe another doctor appointment about infertility. I never thought they'd be the doorway into a lie so carefully constructed it almost destroyed my sense of reality. He told me a story about a distant cousin, someone I had never met, someone struggling with addiction, a newborn baby about to be swallowed by the foster care system unless we stepped in. "There's no one else," he said quietly. "She's family, even if she doesn't feel like it." I remember the way his hands trembled when he said it, the way he avoided my eyes for just a second too long. I should have asked harder questions right then. But all I could think about was the word baby, about the 3 miscarriages that still lived in my body like ghosts, about the therapy sessions where I'd learned to say, maybe motherhood just isn't in the cards for me, and almost believed it. "This could be our second chance," he said. And God help me, it worked. Within weeks, a tiny baby girl was placed in our arms, paperwork signed, crib assembled, sleepless nights and bottle warmers and lullabies whispered into the dark. My husband named her without asking me. I told myself it didn't matter. New parents make strange choices when they're overwhelmed. But something felt wrong. He was too confident, too calm, like none of this was new to him at all. And then I noticed the baby's eyes. My eyes. That was when the ground shifted under my feet, before I even knew why. 6 months later, I would be sitting alone in my car, staring at an email on my phone that would unravel my marriage in one brutal line of text. Probability of maternity, 99.8%. That baby wasn't adopted. She was his. And everything I thought I knew about my husband was a lie. Before the baby, before the lies, there was us. 8 years of marriage, built on what I believed was shared grief, shared resilience, shared truth. We met in our late 20s, introduced by mutual friends at a backyard birthday party. He was funny without trying. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke, who remembered details other people forgot. When he asked for my number, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt easy, natural, like something quietly clicking into place. Dating him felt safe. That was the word I used back then. Safe. He wasn't flashy or impulsive. He planned. He showed up on time. He talked about the future in steady, practical sentences. When he proposed 2 years later, kneeling in our tiny apartment living room with a ring he'd clearly agonized over choosing, I cried so hard I couldn't even answer right away. He laughed, nervous and relieved, and slipped the ring onto my finger with hands that shook just a little. I thought that trembling meant love. Marriage, at first, was good. Not perfect, but real. We argued about dishes and money and whether the TV should be mounted or left on the stand. We hosted friends, took road trips, built routines that felt like roots growing deeper into the ground. Then came the pregnancies. The first miscarriage blindsided us. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, back against the tub, staring at blood that didn't make sense. He held me while I cried, his chin resting on the top of my head. "We'll try again," he whispered. "This doesn't change anything." The second loss hurt differently. Less shock, more dread, like my body was betraying me in slow motion. The third nearly broke me. 5 years, 3 miscarriages, and a silence that settled between us whenever someone else announced a pregnancy. I started therapy after that. He encouraged it, said he wanted me to heal, whatever that looked like. Eventually, I told him I was making peace with the idea that motherhood might not happen for me. I said it out loud enough times that it almost sounded true. He nodded, held my hand, said he loved me either way. What I didn't know then was that while I was learning to grieve a future I might never have, he was quietly constructing a different one, without my consent. Looking back, there were gaps I explained away. A 2-week trip to help a sick aunt nearly 10 months earlier. He came back different, distant, said he was exhausted, depressed. We barely touched each other for months after. I blame stress, work, grief, anything but betrayal. That's the thing about trust. It fills in blanks automatically. Our families were intertwined by then. His mother called often, always warm, always praising him for being such a devoted husband. His sister talked about us like we were the stable couple, the example. I believed it. I wore that identity like armor. So when he came home that Thursday with tears in his eyes and a story about a baby needing saving, every part of my past lined up to support his lie. My losses, my longing, our years together. Of course I said yes. Of course I believed him. Because the man I married didn't cheat, didn't lie, didn't secretly have a child with someone else. Or so I thought. The truth is, the betrayal didn't start with the baby. It started the moment he decided I didn't deserve the truth, and trusted me to love him anyway. The first warning signs didn't arrive like alarms. They slipped in quietly, disguised as reasonable explanations, exhaustion, coincidence. At the time, I didn't call them red flags. I called them stress. After we agreed to the adoption, my husband changed in subtle ways. He became intensely focused, almost obsessive, about the process. Every spare moment was spent researching kinship adoption laws, printing packets, making calls. He spoke with certainty, using phrases like, "The state is already involved, and this is time-sensitive," shutting down any suggestion that we slow things down. "Can we at least meet the cousin?" I asked one night, sitting at the kitchen table with paperwork spread between us. "I just want to understand the full situation." "There's no time," he said quickly. Too quickly. "She's ashamed. She doesn't want to face us. The baby needs stability now." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten, but I ignored it. Then his mother called. She told me how proud she was of us, how we were doing the right thing, how this baby was lucky to have such selfless parents. I remember hanging up the phone and staring at it, confused. We hadn't shared many details yet. Somehow, she already knew enough to congratulate us. It felt like a conversation I'd been added to halfway through. As the weeks passed, his phone became an extension of his body. It was suddenly password protected. He stepped into the garage for calls, lowering his voice even when I was nowhere near. When mail from the adoption agency arrived, he grabbed it before I could even read the envelope. "You don't trust me?" he asked once when I reached for a letter without thinking. "Of course I do," I said immediately, because that's what a wife says when she's afraid of what the alternative might mean. The baby arrived 3 weeks later. She was tiny, fragile, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like hospital soap. The moment my husband took her into his arms, something shifted in his face. It wasn't nervousness or awe, it was familiarity, comfort, like muscle memory. He knew how to hold her without fumbling, how to warm a bottle to the exact right temperature, how to calm her cries with a soft humming sound that stopped her instantly. When I joked that he looked like a natural, his smile tightened, like he'd almost been caught at something. "I practice," he said, "with friends' babies." Maybe, but the learning curve never came. And then there were the physical details. The baby's eyes were the same rare shade as his. Her chin had the same curve. At a family dinner, my mother laughed and said, "That's funny. She looks just like you." My husband froze, just for a second, long enough that I noticed. He changed the subject so abruptly, it left an uncomfortable silence hanging over the table. Later that night, when I brought it up gently, he brushed it off. "Babies change," he said. "You're overthinking it." I wanted to believe him, so I did. But my body didn't forget. Sleep became fractured. I lay awake listening to the baby breathe, replaying fragments of the past I hadn't wanted to examine too closely. His 2-week trip to help a sick aunt, the emotional distance that followed, the months where he'd pulled away from intimacy, the sudden secrecy, the urgency, no delays, no questions, no space for doubt. If the baby was 3 months old now, then she had been conceived around the time he'd been gone. The math didn't make sense, not if the baby belonged to a distant cousin, but it made terrifying sense if she belonged to someone he didn't want me to know about. One night, while warming a bottle at 3 a.m, my hand started shaking so badly I had to set it down. A thought surfaced, quiet, rational, and impossible to unthink. What if this baby wasn't adopted at all? I told myself it was grief talking, trauma, the residue of loss. But once a thought like that takes root, it doesn't disappear. It waits. And it watches. The moment everything truly broke wasn't loud. It didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived quietly, in the space between a crying baby and a husband sleeping too deeply to hear her. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not even the restless half-sleep I'd been surviving on since the baby came home. She woke just after 2 a.m., her cry sharp and insistent. My husband didn't stir. He was out cold, exhaustion, or something heavier weighing him down. "I've got her," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. In the kitchen, the house felt unfamiliar, too quiet, lights too bright. I set a bottle in the warmer and leaned against the counter, staring at the digital clock as seconds ticked by. And then my mind started doing what it had been doing more and more lately, replaying timelines, rearranging memories, connecting dots I didn't want to see. His 2-week trip, the distance afterward, the sudden urgency of the adoption, the way he'd known exactly what to do with a newborn. If the baby was 3 months old now, my hands began to shake. I told myself to stop, that I was spiraling, that this was what grief looked like when it had nowhere else to go. But the thought didn't leave. It sat there steady and horrifying. What if this baby isn't adopted? I fed her, held her until her breathing slowed, her tiny fingers curling around mine with complete trust. That nearly broke me. I loved her. That was the worst part. Whatever the truth was, my heart was already involved. By morning, I knew I couldn't live with uncertainty anymore. When my husband left for work, kissing my forehead like everything was normal, I waited until his car disappeared down the street. Then I picked up my keys and drove to the nearest pharmacy. The DNA test kit sat on the shelf like it had been waiting for me. I stared at it for a long time before putting it in my basket. My chest felt tight, my mouth dry. I paid in cash without thinking, like that would somehow make this less real. At home, my hands were steady in a way that scared me. I swabbed the baby gently during a diaper change, apologizing under my breath for what I was about to do. Then I went into the bathroom and grabbed my own toothbrush. If I was wrong, I needed proof. If I was right, I needed it undeniable. I mailed the kit that same afternoon and paid extra for rush results. The waiting was torture. 10 days of acting normal while my brain unraveled. I watched my husband cuddle the baby, sing to her, call her our miracle. I smiled when I was supposed to, nodded, played my part. At night, I lay awake listening to him breathe, wondering how someone could lie so completely and still sleep. The email came while I was at work. I didn't open it right away. I sat in my car during lunch, phone in my lap, staring at the subject line like it might disappear if I waited long enough. Finally, I tapped it. Probability of maternity, 99 point. The world didn't tilt. There was no dramatic moment. Just a deep, hollow silence. I stared at the screen for a long time, rereading the numbers, the words, the clinical certainty of it all. The baby wasn't adopted. She was his. My husband hadn't saved a child from foster care. He'd hidden his own biological child inside our marriage. Every strange detail suddenly snapped into focus. The secrecy, the urgency, the lies layered so carefully they almost worked. I sat there until my lunch break ended, until my phone buzzed, with a text from him asking if I'd picked up more diapers. I drove home on autopilot. On the way, I called a friend, someone I trusted completely, who happened to be a divorce attorney. My voice sounded distant even to me as I told him what I'd found. "Document everything," he said. "Don't confront him yet, not until you have the full picture." That night, while my husband slept, I went through his things, carefully, quietly. In the back of his nightstand drawer, I found an old phone. Dead battery, no passcode. When I charged it, the screen lit up like a confession. Months of messages between him and another woman. His ex. And with every line I read, I realized the truth was far worse than I'd imagined. I didn't confront him right away. That surprised me about myself. I always thought betrayal would make me explosive. Tears, screaming, something dramatic enough to match the damage. But shock doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like stillness so deep it scares you. After finding the old phone, I sat on the floor of the garage until nearly dawn, scrolling through messages my husband never meant for me to see. They went back years. At first I hoped, pathetically, that I was misreading them, that there was context missing, that I'd misunderstood something fundamental. I hadn't. The messages laid everything out with brutal clarity. He and his ex, his college girlfriend from years ago, the one he'd told me he'd lost touch with, had reconnected at a high school reunion. It started emotionally, late-night texts, nostalgia disguised as harmless catching up. Then it crossed a line. Then several. She got pregnant. He panicked. He was married. He had a life. He didn't want a baby. The messages showed him pressuring her again and again to terminate the pregnancy. When she refused, his tone changed. Cold, defensive, focused on damage control. That was when the plan started to form. He talked about hiding it, about giving the baby up, about going somewhere far enough away that no one would connect the dots. The sick aunt trip wasn't about family at all. It was about distance, disappearance, control. And then months later, regret. The messages from 3 months ago were frantic, desperate. Him begging the adoption agency to reverse the process. Him spiraling when he was told it wasn't that simple. That was when the cousin story appeared. The lies stacked so neatly they almost looked like truth. Almost. I felt sick, not metaphorically, physically. My body reacted before my mind fully caught up. Nausea, dizziness, a pressure in my chest that made breathing feel like work. The worst part wasn't even the affair. It was realizing how deliberately he'd involved me, how he'd watched me grieve our miscarriages while knowing he'd created a child with someone else, how he'd placed that baby in my arms and let me bond with her under completely false pretenses. I thought about all the nights I'd gotten up first so he could sleep, the bottles I'd warmed, the lullabies I'd whispered. He'd let me love her. He'd let me believe. By morning, my shock hardened into something colder. Resolve! I called my attorney friend again and told him everything. I sent screenshots, photos, the DNA results. His response was immediate. This is nuclear-level deception, he said. Adultery, fraud, intentional misrepresentation. You have grounds for divorce on multiple fronts. What do I do? I asked. There was a pause on the line. What do you want to do? I didn't hesitate. I want him to face consequences. That afternoon, divorce papers were drafted. The language was precise and unforgiving. Adultery, fraud, intentional deception, full reimbursement requested for adoption costs, medical expenses, everything I'd paid for under false assumptions. I printed everything. The DNA results, the texts, the adoption paperwork filled with lies. I organized it into a single folder, thick enough to feel heavy in my hands. When he came home the next day, the baby was at his mother's house for the afternoon. He called out to me from the garage, voice casual, like nothing in the world was wrong. Can you help me unload? Come in here first, I said. We need to talk. He walked into the kitchen, smiling, and stopped cold when he saw my face. What's wrong? He asked. I slid the folder across the table. Open it. He hesitated, then did. I watched his expression change page by page. Confusion, recognition, then terror so raw it almost felt like a confession. The DNA results were on top, the divorce papers underneath. I know everything, I said, my voice strangely calm. The affair, the pregnancy, the fake adoption, all of it. The folder slipped from his hands and hit the floor. Let me explain. Explain what? I asked. How you cheated? How you hid a pregnancy? How you brought another woman's baby into our home and lied to my face for 6 months? He reached for my hand. I pulled away. This isn't a mistake, I said. This was planned, calculated, and I'm done. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I meant it. The first night after I handed him the divorce papers, my phone became unusable. Missed calls stacked on top of each other. Voicemails filled my inbox. Some low, tightly controlled apologies delivered through clenched teeth. Others sharp accusations fired off without pause. His tone swung between restraint and hostility, like he was forcing himself not to lose control. I didn't respond. I sent one message, contact my lawyer. Then I turned my phone off. By morning, he escalated. He showed up at the hotel where I'd checked in, standing at the front desk, with the baby in his arms. The receptionist called my room, her voice careful. Ma'am, there's a man here asking for you. He says it's urgent. I don't want visitors, I said. Please ask him to leave. Instead, he raised his voice in the lobby. Not sobbing, not pleading, but sharp and deliberate, projecting just enough to draw attention. He told anyone within earshot that his wife had walked out on their family, that I was abandoning a baby who needed stability. His jaw was locked tight, his face flushed, not with tears, but with anger held just under the surface, the kind that leaks sideways when it has nowhere else to go. Security warned him twice before threatening to call the police. Only then did he leave. That was just the beginning. His mother called next. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't want context. She went straight to accusation about how I was destroying the family, how I was punishing an innocent child, how I was being cruel and vindictive. Your son cheated, I said calmly. He lied about everything. He made a mistake, she snapped. He's trying to fix it. By committing fraud? I asked. That's not fixing anything. She said the baby needed a mother. She has one, I replied. It's just not me. She hurled every insult she could think of before I ended the call. Then his sister tried a softer tactic. A long text about forgiveness. Grace. What Jesus would do. I read it once and deleted it without responding. I wasn't going to be guilted into accepting betrayal. A few days later, his lawyer filed an emergency motion. They were trying to force financial responsibility onto me. The argument was that I had assumed parental responsibility through the adoption process, that I had bonded with the baby. That 6 months of care meant I couldn't simply walk away. My lawyer shut it down immediately. The adoption, he argued, was fraudulent. I had signed documents under false pretenses, believing we were adopting a distant relative's child, not my husband's affair baby. There was no informed consent, no legal obligation. The judge wasn't pleased, but not with me. No financial responsibility, she ruled. This court will not impose support based on deception. When his lawyer tried to argue emotional bonding, the judge frowned. That's not how parentage works, she said. Decision made. He didn't accept it quietly. That same week, he changed tactics. Social media. He posted vague, emotionally loaded statements about people who abandon families when things get hard, about true character being revealed during crisis. Friends rushed to defend him. Some people I'd known for years started messaging me, confused, judgmental, angry. I stayed silent. My lawyer told me to let him keep talking. Then he escalated again. He began sending mutual friends the DNA test, without context, just the document showing he was the baby's biological father. No mention of the affair, no mention of the lies, no mention of the fraudulent adoption. It made me look like a woman divorcing her husband simply for having a child. That's when I stopped staying quiet. I posted once. Screenshots of his messages with his ex, texts detailing the affair, messages about hiding the pregnancy, proof of the fake adoption story, the DNA results. Caption: since half-truths are circulating, my husband had an affair, got another woman pregnant, hid the pregnancy, had the baby born in secret, then fraudulently adopted his own affair baby while telling me it was a distant cousin's child. I discovered the truth through a DNA test. I am divorcing him for adultery and fraud. Full story. I tagged everyone who'd been talking. The reaction was immediate. Support evaporated. Apologies poured in. People turned on him just as loudly as they'd defended him days earlier. That night, he deleted all his social media. But he still wasn't finished. He called my workplace, told my boss I was having a mental health crisis, claimed I was unstable, said I was making concerning statements, tried to get me suspended. My boss called me directly. Your husband contacted us, he said carefully. What's going on? I explained briefly. He was quiet for a moment, then said, that's harassment. HR will document it. He doesn't get to interfere with your job. Apparently, my husband had already contacted HR. They flagged it immediately. Then came the call I didn't expect. His ex's wife. Yes, she said, voice tight and unsteady. Is this true about my husband and yours? I confirmed it, sent her the evidence. She thanked me and hung up. Later, I learned she confronted him that night. He denied it. She kicked him out anyway. Somehow, my husband still found a way to blame me. He called furious, voice strained and controlled, accusing me of ruining another family. There were long pauses on the line, sharp breaths, silence stretched thin, like he was forcing himself not to explode. You destroyed his marriage, he said. No, I replied. You did that when you slept with him. He said his ex was threatening to push custody issues. Good luck, I said. Not my problem. Then I blocked his number again. By the end of the week, I was exhausted, but clear. He wasn't trying to fix anything. He was trying to escape consequences. And I was done carrying the weight of his choices. The noise stopped. That was the strangest part. After weeks of calls, motions, messages, accusations, after the world had been loud with other people's opinions and demands, everything went quiet. No new filings, no late-night voicemails, no notifications lighting up my phone. Just silence. And in that silence, everything I'd been holding together finally started to come apart. I didn't fall apart in public. I didn't collapse in front of friends or cry on someone's shoulder. I did it alone, in the hotel room after work, sitting on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on, staring at nothing. That's when it hit me. I missed her. The baby. The realization came out of nowhere and landed like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on survival, lawyers, evidence, boundaries, that I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge what I'd lost. 6 months. 6 months of midnight feedings and warm bottles. 6 months of pacing the floor in the dark, whispering nonsense just to keep her calm. 6 months of her tiny hand curling around my finger like it trusted me with her entire world. I hadn't just walked away from my husband. I'd walked away from the child who thought I was her mother. That thought sat in my chest, heavy and unmoving. Some nights I replayed ordinary moments like they were precious memories from a different life. The way she'd quiet the second I picked her up, the little sound she made when she was almost asleep, the weight of her against my shoulder, warm and real. And then the other truth would crash in right behind it. None of it was real. Every moment I'd bonded with her had been built on deception. I hadn't chosen motherhood. I'd been manipulated into it. My consent had been stolen along with my trust. Both things were true at the same time, and they tore at me from opposite directions. One night, I found myself standing in the baby aisle at a grocery store, frozen in front of rows of formula and diapers I no longer needed. My throat closed. I left my cart and walked out without buying anything, hands shaking as I pushed through the automatic doors. That was my breaking point. I called my therapist that night and asked for an emergency session. Sitting on her couch, I finally said out loud what I'd been avoiding. I loved her, I said. My voice cracked, despite my effort to keep it steady. And I don't know what that makes me now. She didn't rush to answer, just waited. I feel like I abandoned a baby, I continued. Even though I know, that staying would have meant accepting a lie so big it would have erased me. She nodded slowly. You didn't abandon a child, she said. You removed yourself from a fraud. The words didn't fix everything, but they gave me something to hold on to. Still, the guilt lingered. It crept in during quiet moments, in the shower, on the drive home from work, late at night when sleep wouldn't come. I wondered if she was okay, if she was healthy, if she was warm. And then I reminded myself over and over that wondering didn't mean responsibility. My husband had made choices long before I ever had the chance to choose. He cheated, he lied, he hid a pregnancy. He placed a child in my arms without telling me the truth and watched me bond with her anyway. That wasn't love. That was exploitation. The darkest moment wasn't when I found out about the affair. It was realizing that if I stayed, I would lose myself completely, raising another woman's child with a man who'd proven he could lie to my face without flinching. Some people might call leaving cold, but staying would have been self-erasure. And that night, alone in a silent room, missing a baby I wasn't allowed to love honestly, I finally understood something I hadn't before. Walking away wasn't cruelty. It was survival. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic declaration, no sudden surge of confidence. It happened quietly, through paperwork, courtrooms, and the slow realization that once the truth was fully exposed, it had weight, real weight. The first real turning point came with the court hearing. Walking into the courtroom, I felt smaller than I wanted to admit. My husband was already there, seated beside his lawyer, posture rigid, jaw set as if bracing for impact. He'd dressed carefully, pressed shirt, neutral colors, trying to look stable, responsible. His mother sat a few rows behind him, holding the baby, a deliberate choice meant to soften the room. I didn't look at them. I focused on the table in front of me. On the folder my lawyer had assembled with clinical precision. DNA results, screenshots of messages, adoption paperwork filled with deliberate lies, timelines that left no room for reinterpretation. When his lawyer argued that I had assumed a parental role, something inside me went still. My lawyer stood. He spoke calmly, methodically, laying out the facts without emotion. He explained how I had been deceived into signing adoption documents under false pretenses, how I had been told the baby belonged to a distant relative, not to my husband and another woman, how consent obtained through fraud is not consent at all. The judge listened, asked questions. Her expression hardened as the full picture came together. Then came the ruling. No financial responsibility, no obligation created by deception, no reward for manipulation. Hearing it stated so plainly loosened something in my chest. Not relief exactly, but validation. An outside authority confirming that what had been done to me wasn't confusion or marital conflict. It was wrongdoing. My husband didn't react the way he'd expected. No outbursts, no tears. Just a tightening of his jaw, a flicker of disbelief that settled into resentment. That was when I understood something clearly for the first time. He had never expected consequences, not real ones. After the hearing, he tried again. Another motion, this time demanding temporary spousal support, claiming he had sacrificed stability during the transition into parenthood. The argument collapsed almost immediately. He'd been working full-time until the baby arrived. The child wasn't ours. The fraud was documented. The judge denied the request without hesitation. Each ruling stripped away another layer of the story he'd built. Then came the call I hadn't anticipated, a number I didn't recognize. It was his ex's husband. His voice was controlled, tight, like someone holding himself together through discipline rather than emotion. He told me he'd just returned from an extended overseas assignment. Months away, limited contact, the kind of work that kept him out of the country for long stretches at a time. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw her, he said quietly. She couldn't hide it anymore. He didn't need to explain further. Pregnancy doesn't stay invisible. He asked if what he suspected was true about the affair, about the baby, about my husband. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't soften it. I sent him the evidence. There was a long silence on the line. Then he said, "Thank you," his voice flat, hollow, and he hung up. Later, I learned he confronted his wife that same night. She denied it at first, tried to deflect. But timelines don't lie. Neither does a body. When the proof was laid out, there was nothing left to argue. He told her to leave. One lie had destroyed 2 marriages, not because it was exposed, but because it existed in the first place. My husband called me afterward furious. "You didn't have to destroy her life," he said. I didn't raise my voice. "You destroyed her life when you slept with her," I said. "I just stopped covering for you." That was the moment the power shifted completely. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. Choosing truth without apology. Choosing to let consequences land where they belonged. Choosing myself, fully, without compromise. From that point on, his messages changed. Shorter, colder, legal. And for the first time since the baby entered our lives, I felt something solid beneath my feet. The truth was no longer something I was uncovering. It was something I was standing on. The aftermath wasn't explosive. It was corrosive. Once the court made its position clear, my husband's approach shifted from emotional pressure to calculated disruption. He stopped trying to pull me back and started trying to punish me for not coming back. The first sign was subtle. A police officer knocked on my hotel room door one evening. Calm, polite, clipboard in hand. He explained there had been a report of stolen property from the marital home, electronics, documents, personal items. My items. I showed receipts, photos, purchase records, emails. The officer sighed, already irritated. "This is a civil matter," he said. "He can't report theft of your own belongings." They noted it and left, but the message had been delivered. He was willing to involve the police to scare me. My lawyer added it to the file. Then came the court hearing that mattered, the one that would close this chapter for good. Asset division, final decree, everything on the table. My husband arrived early, dressed carefully again. His mother was with him, holding the baby, positioning herself just close enough to be seen. The optics were deliberate. Struggling father, supportive grandmother, innocent child. I didn't engage. My lawyer did exactly what he'd promised. He laid everything out methodically. The affair, the deception, the fraudulent adoption, the harassment, the false police report, the workplace interference. A timeline so clear it bordered on humiliating. My husband's lawyer tried every angle. That I should pay child support because I had acted as a parent. Rejected. That I owed emotional damages for leaving. Rejected. That I should cover his legal fees because he was under financial strain. Rejected. That I should pay temporary or permanent spousal support. The judge didn't even pause. Denied. At one point, his lawyer tried to argue I had benefited emotionally from a brief experience of motherhood and therefore shared responsibility for its outcome. The judge looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "This court does not reward fraud," she said flatly. Final ruling. The house would be sold. Equity split evenly. Legally fair, even if it tasted bitter. He would keep his car. I would keep mine. We would each retain our own retirement accounts. He would receive no alimony, no spousal support, no child support from me. I would be reimbursed for adoption-related costs and baby expenses I had paid during the 6 months I was deceived. Each party would pay their own legal fees. A restraining order was granted. He was not to contact me for any reason. Divorce finalized in 30 days, pending the sale of the house. My husband's face when the judge finished was something I won't forget. Not devastation, shock, as if he truly believed the system would bend for him if he tried hard enough. Outside the courthouse, his mother confronted me. "Are you happy now?" she demanded. "You've ruined his life." I met her eyes. "He ruined his own life," I said. "I just stopped letting him ruin mine." "That baby deserves a family," she snapped. "Then he should contact the actual mother and deal with the truth he created," I replied, and walked away. In the weeks that followed, consequences kept landing. My husband's social circle collapsed. People distanced themselves quietly. Invitations stopped. Messages went unanswered. Trust, once broken at that scale, doesn't recover politely. I heard through mutual acquaintances that his ex's situation imploded too. Her husband filed for divorce. Lawyers got involved. The affair that had once felt secret and contained now touched every corner of their lives. The house sold shortly after. The process was mechanical. Paperwork, signatures, wire transfers. When the proceeds hit my account, the number looked almost surreal. Money representing the final severing of a life I'd once believed in. And then, silence. The restraining order did its job. From what I heard, my husband moved back in with his parents. They helped with the baby while he worked. The situation was tense. His father reportedly lectured him constantly about consequences and poor choices, and his ex wanted nothing to do with the mess anymore. Through lawyers, she made it clear she wouldn't step in, wouldn't play happy family, wouldn't carry the weight of a child born from betrayal. My husband was raising the baby alone now, working full-time, living with parents who resented the situation, carrying the consequences he could no longer outrun. No one won, except maybe the truth. And me, because I was finally free. The ending didn't come with fireworks. It came with quiet mornings, and that was how I knew I'd won. After the divorce was finalized, my life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became mine. I moved into a small apartment with big windows and no shared memories. The silence there felt different. No longer heavy, no longer haunted, just open. Therapy helped, more than I expected, not because it erased what happened, but because it helped me name it. Betrayal, fraud, manipulation, loss, and grief. Not just for a marriage, but for the version of myself that trusted without hesitation. I grieved the baby too. I won't pretend otherwise. I wondered if she was okay, if she was healthy, if she slept through the night yet. That never fully goes away, I think. But the wondering softened over time, turning into something gentler, acceptance instead of pain. She didn't need me to survive. And I didn't need to sacrifice myself to prove I wasn't heartless. That was the hardest lesson. As for my husband, the reckoning continued long after the court stopped paying attention. He lost credibility, lost friendships, lost the version of himself that believed he could lie his way out of consequences. Every attempt to manipulate, to spin, to blame others only isolated him further. People stopped returning calls. Doors closed quietly. The truth didn't shout. It just stood there, immovable. His ex paid her price too. Her marriage ended. Her carefully hidden choices became public reality. The fantasy she'd participated in collapsed under its own weight. That wasn't revenge I orchestrated. That was consequence. And it was enough. The most unexpected part came months later, when I realized something had shifted inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not constantly. Not consuming. I could think about the past without my chest tightening, without my hands shaking. I started saying yes to small things again. Dinner with friends. A weekend trip. Plans that didn't require emotional armor. I even laughed. Real laughter. The kind that surprises you because you forgot what it sounded like. People asked if I'd ever forgive him. Maybe someday, in the abstract sense. Not for him, but so the story doesn't own me forever. But reconciliation? No. Some bridges burn for a reason. What I know now is this. Walking away wasn't cruelty. It wasn't punishment. It was self-respect. I didn't destroy anyone's life. I refused to let mine be destroyed to protect a lie. And if there's a happy ending here, it isn't that everyone got what they deserved. It's that I got my future back. Truth didn't just expose the deception. It set me free. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you. Not just for listening, but for witnessing a story that wasn't easy to tell. Betrayal like this doesn't end cleanly. There's no perfect justice, no moment where everything suddenly feels fair. What there is, though, is choice. The choice to stop carrying someone else's lies. The choice to walk away from manipulation even when it hurts. The choice to protect your future instead of preserving a past built on deception. If you've ever been told you were too cold, too unforgiving, or too harsh for leaving a situation that was breaking you, this is your reminder. Self-respect is not cruelty. And if parts of this story felt uncomfortably familiar, you're not alone. So many people live inside quiet betrayals, convincing themselves they should stay, endure, or be the bigger person. But survival isn't about enduring lies. It's about refusing to live inside them. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you've been through something similar, feel free to share. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if you want more real, unfiltered stories about love, betrayal, consequences, and healing, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself. And remember, choosing truth is never the wrong ending.